This is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. What is going on here in Minnesota, you guys? What's gotten into these teams? Twins, of course, signed Carlos Correa a few days ago. That move should be official here on Wednesday. Megan Ryan, Twins beat writer for the Star Tribune, will join me here on the show in a little bit to talk about that move, to talk about just kind of the flurry of off-season moves the Twins have made so far. And speaking of flurry, Marc-Andre Fleury joining the Wild in a blockbuster trade on Monday as well, just before the deadline. Reigning Vezina Trophy winner coming to the Wild, Kaapo Kähkönen leaving the Wild now, departing in part of another trade made by Bill Guerin. Bill Guerin making 4 trades before the deadline, but the biggest move coming for Marc-Andre Fleury, a conditional first-round pick, which the Wild will hope will convey as a first-rounder because that would mean they have gone deep in the postseason. We'll get to that a little bit more here in a minute as well. Got to talk a little bit about the Timberwolves game. They fell to Dallas 110-108. Playoff intensity in that game. You know what? You're not going to win every game, so I get it. That's fine. But that would have been a nice one to have. And the Vikings hosting Za'Darius Smith, a former Packer, an edge rusher that would help them tremendously if they have the money, if they have the role for him. I think they definitely have the role. The money would be the question. So a lot of moves, a lot of wheeling and dealing going on in these parts lately, and it's a fun thing to talk about. So first, what did I miss? Well, I kind of teased it at the beginning, but we got to talk about the Wild. No excuses now. That's the theme of part of this show anyway. No excuses for whatever happens now going forward. They've been given the ample roster. They've been given ample talent to make a run in the postseason. Again, that does not guarantee anything. Being given an opportunity does not guarantee success, does not guarantee that it will happen. But in making acquisitions to shore up the fourth line, getting Tyson Jost, getting Nick Delorier, getting this new defenseman that they got, Jacob Middleton from in the trade for Kaapo Kähkönen with San Jose. That also can help them a little bit with some playoff grit. But Marc-Andre Fleury, really the big story in all this. And, when the Wild had slumped over this previous month, basically from mid-February to mid-March, a big part of the story was the goaltending. It wasn't just the goaltending, but that was a big piece of it. They just weren't stopping pucks. They'd given up, I think I counted it up, I think it was like 55 goals in 13 games, something like that. So like 4.5 goals per game, something in that range. Just, numbers that you can't win with in this league. And, part of it was Cam Talbot wasn't playing well. Part of it was, the defense was a little bit leaky. Kaapo Kähkönen, when he got in there, was not playing well. But it was on Cam Talbot. And then Talbot started to rally a little bit lately. And you wondered, okay, are they going to stick with kind of what they have, ride this out, hope that they can get through the last, 20 or so games of the regular season with this goalie tandem with a lot of, every other day playing, and then get to the playoffs and probably ride Cam Talbot? Or are they going to do something? And Bill Guerin, it was interesting. Bill Guerin, their GM, was asked last week whether they needed to add a goalie, and he said not necessarily. And that was kind of the first inkling that maybe something was up. And 3 months ago, I thought they needed a goalie upgrade. I thought Talbot was fine. It just didn't feel like they had the kind of goaltending that could make them go on a deep playoff run. I think Talbot was fine in last year's playoffs. He wasn't the reason they lost in 7 games. They just kind of got worn down physically by Vegas in that series, and Vegas had the home ice and they won Game 7. And that's just the way it went. Vegas was probably the better team. Now, fast forward a year. The Wild has the goalie that Vegas used to beat them in 7 games last year, Marc-Andre Fleury, and he was dealt in the offseason to Chicago, now dealt to the Wild on an expiring contract. We'll see how much more he plays here beyond this season, but for this year, Wild now have 2 veteran goalies, one of them a surefire Hall of Famer, someone who has won Stanley Cups, who has won the Vezina Trophy, who has this experience to go on a playoff run. They added some muscle with Delorier, with Middleton. They added a little bit more skill with Jost. So, where does that get them? I don't know where it gets them ultimately. What I know where it gets them right now is in a position where there are no excuses. You've gotten enough pieces, you've gotten enough of a shakeup, and you've gotten kind of that signature move with Marc-Andre Fleury that there should be no question about the confidence in your ability to go into the playoffs and win. And again, hockey's weird. When you have a sport where you don't score all that much, you can drop a 2-1 game when the goalie stands on his head and suddenly you're behind in the series, your confidence sags, you start holding on to the stick too tight, and next thing you know, you're out of the playoffs. That has happened to the Wild before. But when you have the pieces you have now, there are no excuses going forward to not feel like you have the ability to make a deep playoff run. They have that roster now. They should have that confidence now. And when you have a goalie who's done it before, and you have another goalie in Cam Talbot who's playing pretty well right now and certainly is not a bad plan B, and who, by the way, pitched a shutout in Monday's game right after learning the Wild had made that trade for Marc-Andre Fleury, you're in a pretty good spot. So all of a sudden, everything the Wild's doing makes sense again. That's going to be another common theme on this show. And they have jolted themselves right back into this mix of a Stanley Cup playoff contender.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Happy to be joined on Daily Delivery today by Megan Ryan, covers the Minnesota Twins for the Star Tribune, along with Phil Miller. Megan, I haven't had you on for a little while here because for a while there wasn't much baseball to talk. That has changed in the last 10 days or so since the lockout ended and the Twins started trading for and signing pretty much everybody in sight. The latest being the move to go get Carlos Correa, one of the best shortstops in baseball. What do you make of all this? First off, just how active they have been in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways we expected them to be active. I mean, obviously going into camp, which is shortened already, 3.5 weeks, I think, is what they'll have until opening day on April 6th. And so you could tell just looking at the roster, like it was not complete. So it would not have been good if they had not done any deals. So we were expecting them to make some moves, and they did. Because they didn't do a lot before the lockout. So it was kind of going to be a crazy off season, quote unquote, whenever the lockout ended. But what I don't think was expected was maybe the level of people that they pursued, namely in Correa, because he was like the top free agent out there. And I really don't think the Twins are really even into this discussion for him. People didn't think that they would go for him or would want to go for him, or just maybe thought he was way out of their league. So it kind of wasn't in the picture until it happened very suddenly overnight, basically. So it has been a very interesting couple of weeks, but I think they're basically almost done. The last thing they probably need is they need to finish their starting rotation. So there are a couple of pitchers out there that they can, try to get on the trade market. And I think that's kind of where it stands now as maybe the final piece to the puzzle this season.
Yeah, but like you said, I think I like the way you stated it. The level of deals that they have made with all of the moves, the trades of a couple weekends ago, including the big one with the Yankees where Josh Donaldson went out, and that more or less facilitated being able to get Carlos Correa because that freed up quite a bit of money on that side. Now we're kind of in an interesting spot where the Twins have not been able to publicly comment on this yet because the deal is not official. But you told me before we started recording that Carlos Correa was in fact in the clubhouse at spring training on Monday, and his soon-to-be teammates have already talked about him.
Yeah, that is the kind of funny part. It seems like old news now because when did this happen? Like, I believe Friday into Saturday morning. So it was like 2 a.m. Saturday probably was when all this went down. And we still not have had like Derek Falvey, that Levine, Rocco Baldelli, like none of the official people at the Twins have alluded to the fact that this has happened, and that is because it is not technically official yet, which is not to say that it's like going to fall through at the last moment, because it's not. But basically, when a guy signs like this, you have to do a couple of things red tape wise. One of them is get your physical to make sure like you're not hiding some egregious injury that nobody knew about.
Right.
And for some reason for Correa, he wants to do it over 2 days. So like that is part of it. And then another part is ensuring this deal, because it is like 105 million or something like that. It's a lot of money. And it takes a bit to get that all insured. And when this happened, obviously on a Friday night, Saturday morning, it was the weekend, right? So it's going to take a couple of days, which is all to say that on Wednesday is kind of the planned official like announcement. And they're going to do a press conference at the spring training facility here in Fort Myers. And it's going to be a grand day in Twins history. But until then, the only people that have talked about it are the players, because they're not really on the official part of it. So they could say like, oh yeah, I saw the news on Twitter and I was so shocked. And like, so that's kind of the reaction we've been able to get. But it is funny because he did arrive at camp. Actually, I believe he got here yesterday, which was Sunday. But then today he was in the clubhouse, like making the rounds and kind of meeting people for the first time. And he even actually came up to some of the beat reporters and introduced himself, which I thought was very wild. that we like raked on his level to meet. But he seemed like a really nice guy. But it was funny because we're not officially like allowed to speak to him on like a on the record thing. So we were making a lot of jokes, and like, we would see like Derek Falvey talking to Carlos Correa in the clubhouse. We'd be like, hey, who's Derek talking to? Do you see? It's like it's just like speaking the air. It's like a ghost. You see, it's kind of like blurry, like it's like blurred out. Like, who is that?
That's funny.
So we had a lot of fun with that this morning, but he is around, just not officially.
What, in talking to players, not just about this, but everything else that has gone down already with all the trades from, like I alluded to a couple weekends ago, what's the mood? What's the prevailing thought right now? Because I'm sure people sad to see some of their teammates go, but also I would imagine somewhat invigorated by, the prospect of playing with some of these new teammates who have pretty good track records.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been like very up and down, right? Like you started the spring and they hadn't really made any deals except for they signed, Dylan Bundy as a starter before the lockout. And you were like, okay, well, that's not quite enough. So it was a little like dire. And then they made a couple of moves and they got Kiner Falefa, who is going to be their starting shortstop for like 1 day until they dealed him to the Yankees. But that was kind of exciting because he's just kind of a younger player. He's up and coming. He's maybe not a huge name, but he's someone that, I had kind of been excited to watch. And so you're like, okay, things are maybe shaping up. And then they got Sonny Gray, who's like, maybe not like the sexiest name out there, but he also has kind of got a proven track record of being able to be a good pitcher. So then it was kind of exciting. And then they made this deal with the Yankees, which was like a little bit of a head scratcher because you're like, they needed a shortstop and then they just immediately traded him away.
Yes.
But you knew that they, had gotten all this money back, quote unquote, with Donaldson. So you were like, okay, like there's something going on here. And then of course they got like Sanchez because they had traded Mitch Garver away. So they needed another catcher, and Ursula, who's going to be kind of a good like utility guy around the field. So you were kind of like, okay, that sort of makes sense. And then the Correa thing like really just came out of nowhere. And that's kind of when it shot up to like maybe the Twins are really serious about this year. Because before it was kind of like, maybe, who knows? But when you go after the biggest free agent on the market and you get him, even if it's just for a season, which is like very possible with the deal he signed, like that says something that like this is not a year that they're trying to take off. This is a year that they're actually trying to make something happen. So I think since then it's been really exciting. And even just talking to the players, I think you can kind of tell like that they're kind of invigorated by it. And even, they signed Joe Smith the other day as like an addition to their bullpen, a veteran guy. And he was even saying like, it feels like this team is like wants to be winners. And that's an exciting thing to like join in and be a part of. So it really kind of shot them up into that stratosphere. And I think now it's just, can they get another really big signing in that starting rotation? And that I think is going to kind of put it over the top.
Yeah, and that would, if they were able to get one of the pitchers they've been targeting, you've seen them linked to a lot of stuff with Oakland. Don't know how that will progress, but you would imagine something has to happen here before the season with the inexperience they have there. But if they're able to do that, then you look at their lineup all of a sudden, and you look at, the way they shake out defensively with, Correa at short when he's healthy is fantastic. Same story with Byron Buxton, the first two players chosen in that draft so many years ago. And then, I think you get some pretty good defensive reputations around the field and the lineup. You can imagine a lineup that looks pretty good too. So you're right. It does reframe things in a certain way where you're like, okay, with 6 teams in each league making the playoffs, maybe the Twins are one of the 6 best teams, or could be one of the 6 best teams by the end of the year, which I didn't think 10 days ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely think that's true too. And it seems like there's that kind of that excitement around the team. And I think even just having that little bump, in the preseason is good, because maybe if you're thinking about last year and you're thinking about the lockout and how everything's just kind of been plodding along or whatever for how long, like this is kind of a shot of energy that this team maybe needed to kind of start off a little bit better, especially than they did last year.
And they didn't. The early spring games weren't great. They weren't scoring many runs,
True.
But it was largely not their A lineup out there. What are they? As you've watched them, what anybody stand out as early camp surprises, or as camp progresses, what do you think needs to happen as they kind of find their footing on the field?
Yeah, this is such a weird spring. And that's kind of just what everyone's been saying so far. And even though I think they're playing their 4th spring game, I'm pretty sure at the moment right now as we speak. And you try to like draw conclusions, but you're seeing some of the guys that are going to be on the major league roster for like 2 innings max,
Right.
So it's like you don't get a great feel. Like yesterday they had like Tyler Rogers and Tyler Duffy out there pitching for the first time in the spring, and they pitched an inning, and so they went 1, 2, 3, like got out all their batters right away. But so looks good, but it's just like you don't have a huge pool. And that's kind of what we're hearing from Rocco and others too, is like it feels like at this point things should be like so much more solidified, because it feels like the season is starting so soon, and it is. But the reality is that a lot of these guys are still in that early spring training feeling, and they're still kind of getting their legs back underneath them. I think another interesting thing too is with the off season happening like concurrently with spring training, a lot of these free agent guys that are out there, that haven't signed or maybe have just signed and are just getting into camp now, like that's valuable time that they're losing. And like, yes, they're really good players. So like maybe they don't need a full spring or that full week or whatever it's going to be that they missed. But baseball is a game where you really do have to kind of like get in and get with your team and brush off those skills that you don't use when you're not playing games regularly. And so it will be very interesting this season, I think, across baseball, just to look at some of those free agent signings or some of those guys that, it took them a while to get into camp for whatever reason, and see like, are they having issues early in the year? Are they kind of struggling to catch up? Like, I think that's going to be something interesting. It's sort of similar to like when the pandemic happened and, the pitchers went from pitching 60 games in a season to trying to do 162. And you saw like, even with the field players too, you saw the injuries that kind of cropped up and stuff across baseball. So it will be interesting as kind of like a grand picture thing, but it's, we'll just have to wait and see.
I mean, they really haven't had a quote unquote normal spring since 2019, right? I mean, because there was both of the last 2 springs were impacted in varying degrees by the pandemic. Last year, certainly less so than the one before, but not entirely normal as you're getting tested every day and going through protocols. Then obviously this year with the spring delayed, I mean, yeah, they've been put through a little bit of a ringer here. And I'm wondering, you're right, who's going to be ready right away and who's going to need a little bit more time to kind of catch up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and that's even like Sonny Gray has kind of mentioned that us a couple of times is, he was the player rep for Cincinnati. So he was like in Florida doing all the negotiations and whatnot. And then of course he got traded. And so then that kind of took some time to figure out, like, I'm not going to Arizona, I'm going to Florida and all of that. And he like hadn't thrown a bullpen yet. So his first bullpen was like 2 days ago here. I think he threw one again today. So, he was kind of saying, I'm not sure if I'm going to be up to 7 innings by April 6th. Like it might only be 2 or 3. And that's just going to be what it's going to be if that's the case.
Last couple things for you, Megan Ryan, enjoying this conversation. There's been a perception around the Twins for a very long time, and I think a decent amount of it is earned, that they just don't spend a lot of money. Like they're a mid-market team, and they've kind of worked the edges. A lot of the free agents they've brought in have not been these big, splashy names. They've been more draft and develop, try to make shrewd trades. Even if it does end up just being a 1-year deal for Correa at like $35 million, does this do enough to, maybe even in tandem with the Donaldson signing of a couple of years ago? Is that perception, do you think, change a little bit with this signing, or is it just is there more? Do we need to see more evidence of it that it's an ongoing thing before we say, yeah, the Twins are spending money now? They're a changed organization.
Yes and no. I don't think that this is, something that people are like, wow, they're like the Yankees and the Dodgers and they're just throwing money at the best players. Like, I don't think that's the case. They've still got a couple of other big signings to go to get to that level. But what I do think it proves is that it's not a team that's going to be pinching pennies all the way. They're a team that has a certain budget that they like to stay around, or that they can spend, and they're going to maximize it. But they're going to do it in a way that's not like, we're going to get every single best player out there. We're going to get, solid people that we've developed, and we're going to get one guy that, can add to this thing that we don't have in our system. And so like, that's Donaldson, that's Correa, whatever. And then the lucky thing is they bred Byron Buxton. So like, he would have been that, but luckily he's a homegrown guy. Right. So I think that's really what it proves, is that like, they'll make the purchase when it counts. I put it akin to this. And like my shopping habits, I do not like shop at like Gucci and Dior and Prada every day, because I simply can't afford it. But I will get like once every year a really nice pair of shoes. That is like something that I will not buy all the time, but it's a special treat. And that's kind of how I put the Twins. They're not rich enough to be shopping at the designer stores every day, but they can get one nice pair of shoes a year.
Carlos Correa is your fancy shoes. I like it. I like the analogy. It works for me, because I kind of spend the same way. You can't spend big all the time, but when you see your moment, you got to go for it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, good stuff, Megan. Last thought for you. What's the best thing you've done in Florida outside of covering this wonderful baseball team?
Oh man. I mean, this is actually my first spring training, because I never got down there last year when I got the job. So it's been interesting. I have not done a lot of fun stuff because the schedule is the same. It's like you get up every morning at 7 a.m. Clubhouse opens at 8:30. You do that. You write your story. You go watch some practice or the game or whatever. Maybe you talk to a few more people. You write your stuff. Maybe you're out of there. It depends on the day, but like 5 o'clock or so, you go get dinner. And then I have worked out at the hotel gym every day. And then I go to sleep. And then I start all over again. So really, it's like very boring. It's not very exciting.
It's just like a new routine you make up once you get there, I guess. So
it is. And like, I will say, like, adding the whole working out every day was like a healthy choice by me. Like maybe I would have more time to like go to the beach if I didn't do that. But I just kind of figured if they're in spring training, perhaps I should be as well. So
well, I hope you find a fun thing or two to do down there, but it sounds like your routine is pretty good. Enjoy your first spring training. It is an eventful one so far. I don't imagine all of them will be like this, but kind of fun to have news to break and stuff to talk about, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely. It makes it interesting, especially when it happens at 2 a.m. when you're sleeping.
I know. I think I jinxed Phil, because I had him on like 10 days ago after the trades, and I said, I hope that the next big thing doesn't happen at 10 p.m. I hope it happens more like 2 p.m. And I guess maybe the signals got crossed and they heard 2 a.m. because that's what happened. All right. Well, thanks, Megan. Good stuff. We'll catch up with you soon. Okay.
Thanks, Rand.
Good stuff from Megan Ryan. As always, good to catch up with her down in Florida. And you know what? It was probably just early last week that we were talking about the Twins' moves and kind of scratching our heads and saying, what are they up to? When they did the deal for kind of Falefa with Texas, and then right away traded him to the Yankees, and they cleared some cap. There's no cap in baseball, otherwise the negotiations might have gone a lot faster this offseason. They cleared some salary with Josh Donaldson, and you're like, well, but what are they up to? What are they doing? I mean, they got Sonny Gray, they've got a little bit of pitching, but suddenly they don't have a shortstop. You don't know who's going to play exactly where. And then they go and sign Carlos Correa, and everything feels like it makes a lot more sense. The lineup makes more sense. You can see the pieces in place for the defense for sure, with Gold Glove caliber play at shortstop. Certainly Gold Glove caliber play with Byron Buxton in center field. Max Kepler in right field. The makings of a pretty good defense, the makings of a pretty good lineup. And then you say, okay, if they really are serious about acquiring one more pitcher, which I think they better be, because I don't think they can go into the season with the rotation they have. If they are serious about all those things, then all of a sudden this makes a lot more sense. So long story short, don't judge a roster before the offseason is over, because you might end up looking a little bit silly if and when everything falls into place. And that is a transition to the Vikings. I've been scratching my head wondering what they're up to as well. Basically, they're kind of in run-it-back mode, it feels like, signing Kirk Cousins to an extension, keeping Danielle Hunter, redoing the deals for Harrison Smith and Adam Thielen, keeping a lot of these 30-something veterans on the team, holdovers from teams that haven't really been successful the last 2 years. I mean, the last 2 years, they've missed the playoffs. They went 7-9 and then 8-9. And again, pandemic being what it was, those years were not necessarily normal. Maybe they deserve a chance to run this back, so to speak, a little bit with new, fresh eyes in place, with Kevin O'Connell as the head coach and his staff coming in, with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah adding the supplementary pieces around them. But you looked at it and said, what are they doing? It doesn't make sense to me. And I still think running it back to a certain degree is a mistake. But if they are going to do that, they still need to add pieces around them. And that brings me to Za'Darius Smith making a free agent visit here. They're putting on the full court press, so to speak. The Vikings tweeted out that the visit had begun. Adam Thielen tweeted about it as well, to try to lure Za'Darius Smith to come here. Of course, very successful with the Packers in 2019 and 2020. Injured most of last year with a back problem, and that scares you if you're going to sign him as an edge rusher, and you've got him and Danielle Hunter both coming off major injuries. In the last year. In Hunter's case, the last 2 years. How much can you count on one or both of those guys? But if they were able to bring him in, that would solve a lot of the pass rush problem, would allow them to address some other things perhaps in the draft, in other moves in free agency, to work around the edges. So bigger picture thing here with the Vikings is don't judge this offseason until it is done, I guess, and I'll try to remember that as well. Let's finish with the cooler. Timberwolves lose to Dallas 110 to 108. Good game, first of two with Dallas here in the coming days. They've got some tough games coming up. Phoenix in that mix as well. Important one with Denver, who they had pulled even with for the number 6 spot before losing to Dallas. So, these games are just magnified now. There's no shame in losing to a good team like Dallas. It was a close game. You're going to lose some of those games, but I think they're learning at this point now what this environment feels like. Starting to feel a little bit like the home stretch of that 2017-2018 season, where every game mattered, where they were trying to squeeze their way into the playoffs, and then ultimately did with that big win over Denver in the final game of the regular season. That's what this feels like right now, and that's great for them to go through. But just going through it, while valuable, you need to have some results mixed in with it as well. So we will be watching to see how that plays out as this season goes along. Can they close this season out on a high note? Can they take some momentum into the postseason? And can they get that number 6 seed that would keep them from having to play in the play-in round? I feel better about their play-in round chances maybe than I did before they had this second half where they looked like a real legitimate playoff team. But still, if you can avoid that, that would be a big deal. So how will they look as these games get even tighter? How will their composure look is something I will be watching down the stretch. That will do it for me today. Should have a lot more wild talk on Wednesday's show. Expecting to have Sarah McClellan, beat writer for the Star Tribune, on to talk about all of these moves in greater detail and get her perspective on those things as well. Thank you so much for joining Daily Delivery today. I am Michael Rand. We will see you again on Wednesday.